Coming to you live from Radio Cayman Studio.
For the record.
For the record. Hear from your government officials, independents, and the opposition on issues that matter to you. The record. Engage in an open dialogue between residents and lawmakers.
For the record.
The record. Informative, impartial, insightful.
This is your talk show.
1-800-534-8255. Your calls, your input. This is For the Record. And now, your host, Orit Connor.
Good morning, good morning, good morning, and welcome to For the Record. Today is Friday, the 25th day of May, 2018. I want to thank you, our listening and viewing audience, for allowing Radio Cayman and by extension For the Record into your homes, into your vehicles as you traverse the busy roads of the Cayman Islands and probably wet roads as well. We're still getting some rain as you traverse the busy roads of the Cayman Islands. For the Record, of course, is a show produced by the staff and management of Radio Cayman, and it is geared towards keeping you abreast of issues as they rise and play out on the local, regional, and international scene. I am your host, Orit Connor, and you're welcome to join me every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday from 7:30 a.m. until 9:30 a.m. Our phone lines are always open. There is always someone there waiting to take your calls. Normally, it is that beautiful radio voice of Miss Susan Watson. You can call us on our toll-free number provided courtesy of Flo. That toll-free number is 1-800-534-8255. You can also call us on 949-8037 and 949-6990. Of course, if you don't like to talk on the telephone, you can email us at For the Record. That is one word, For the Record, at CANDW.KY. We also have our WhatsApp number, that number 925-3261, where we encourage you to leave us a text message or a voice note. If you leave a voice note, then the contents of that voice note will be played over the air during the course of the show. But we urge you, do not call that number and expect an answer, because we won't be answering that phone. Little housekeeping before I introduce my guests this morning. And on my way in, one of our regular listeners, Miss Phyllis Moxham, called me this morning, and she wanted to big up Miss Susan about the gospel music that she plays in that she is playing in the morning. She says that is something, even if you don't want to get up in the morning and get out, that music inspires you and makes you want to come out and get up and do whatever it is that you have to do as well. She also had high praise for the Cayman Islands, the Government Hospital Health Services Authority. Her mother, Miss Verna, who had to go to the hospital, and she was heaping high praises on the staff at the Health Services Authority, in particular 2 nurses who assisted her as well. And she has nothing but praise for the Health Services Authority as well. I'm sure that you can't see my eyes through my glasses, but if you could, my eyes are red this morning, and it's from nothing other than being up all night watching the results of the Barbados elections. And today, the map of Barbados is red, red, red. And it is not from the sargassum weed that is floating around there and showing up on the beaches. It is as a result of the enormous victory of the Barbados Labour Party last night. The elections were on the 24th, and the count didn't start until after midnight. It was pretty late. I went to bed at 20 minutes after 3. And at that point in time, I think there was only 1 or 2 constituencies that actually they had final results in, at that point in time. So extremely interesting night for Barbados. Some history made as well. First female prime minister for Barbados. And 10 years ago to the date, Trinidad and Tobago had their first female prime minister elected as well. And one of the commentators on the show that I was watching questioned whether or not Freudel Stewart, the prime minister, whether or not he was cognizant of that fact when he decided to choose the 24th of May as the election date, because the tables turned on him there, and Barbados ended up with their first female prime minister on the same date as well. But I don't want to talk about that all by myself this morning, and it is my pleasure to have in the studio today, being the date is assigned for the opposition, the official opposition. It's my pleasure to have in the studio with me this morning the Honorable D. Ezard Miller, Leader of the Opposition. Also with us is MLA Mr. Chris Saunders, and he's a spokesperson for probably everything, right? Finance.
Financial.
And the big surprise this morning as well, we will have in the studio with us also this morning the Honorable Alden McLaughlin, Premier of the Cayman Islands. He will be around the table along with the Leader of the Opposition and Mr. Chris Saunders this morning. So you know that we're going to be talking about something extremely important if we're going to have those three persons around the table. So without any further ado, I'm going to start with Mr. Saunders and say good morning to him, and then to the Honorable D. Ezard Miller, and then Mr. Miller can take the mic from there after. Mr. Saunders, good morning. Welcome back to For the Record. Quite a familiar place for you.
Yeah, good morning.
You sometimes say this helped to make or break you.
Yeah,
right
you
here,
know,
right?
well, you know, I have a soft spot for Radio Cayman, and particularly this show. You know, it gave me a good platform to start. And I have my son Daniel with me this morning, so just saying hello to him. His school hasn't started. Yeah, I'm cool.
Okay,
Mr. Miller, good morning, sir. Welcome.
Good morning. And good to be here, OC, as usual. You know, we all have we enjoy coming here for the record and dealing with the general public, you know, sticking to my mantra of participatory democracy. And I want to particularly say in the beginning that I'm very pleased that the Premier has decided to join us to talk about the House of Commons decision to legislate for us, particularly on the open register on beneficial ownership, and to talk more deliberately about the constitutional changes that he would like to approach the UK to open a dialogue on. I was offered the opportunity to join him on his press conference when he came back from the UK on Wednesday. I think that went very well. I think it is very important for us to show unity and that we support the government on the things that really matter about Cayman. As you will recall, when I was privileged to become Leader of the Opposition, there were certain things that the group and I agreed with. And one of those things were that when the threats come to Cayman and our survival, we are not going to play petty politics with it. We are going to sit down around a table with the government and not only sit around a table, but be prepared, as we have done in this case, to go public and say that we are in support of the government. And we want to also thank the Premier for giving us the opportunity to participate in the process. We believe that's the right thing to do for Cayman at this time, and I look forward to a fruitful discussion and the opportunity here for the Premier and I to put out a united front to the public so that there is not the opportunity, and we know that people are going to take the opportunity, but at least the effectiveness will be less. Because we'll see, like myself, you've been around, you're showing a few more gray hairs than me. But that's probably
I've been around the block several times.
That's probably because you have
probably
a
rider on it too.
that you have a beard and I don't. But what I'm saying is we've been around, and we will recall in the 72 Constitution, we didn't get all that we should have gotten because certain groups played part of politics with it. We didn't get single-member constituencies, which was one of the things that was advocated for that. People saw that as a threat. Many of the politicians in the legislative assembly at the time saw that as a threat to their being able to mastermind their own re-election. So it was, and then we did the 92 Constitution, you will remember.
Yes,
we had lots of public discussion. We got agreement. We brought in constitutional commissioners. We went district to district. And again, for political expediency, certain politicians in the Legislative Assembly at the time decided to sabotage that. And you will recall that brought about the big change in the approach to constitutional advancement by the United Kingdom, i.e., prior to the rejection of the 92 Constitution, every throne speech that a governor gave in our Legislative Assembly, which was done those days in February every year, they always offered up the opportunity for constitutional advancement and that the UK government would support constitutional advancement, the only condition being it had to be generated by the people in the Cayman Islands.
Yes. Since
that, the British government has been doing as they see fit with us. From that came the white paper, Progress and Prosperity. Partnership and
Progress for Partnership and Prosperity.
Right.
Yes.
And ever since that, they have been in many instances unilaterally deciding what happens to Cayman. And I believe that if we have an opportunity now to get some relief from what myself and others have always referred to as the United Kingdom's nuclear option in the Constitution, I think we must seize that opportunity. And I think that I believe the Premier believes and we accept his position that he believes there's a window of opportunity here because and Mr. Chris and I were in the meeting with Lord Ahmed in the FCO, and the one thing that he repeated constantly was that, well, we want to assist you all, we want to do something for you, so I believe this is a good opportunity, and I look forward to the Premier being here today and offering up to the public and us joining him in the discussion of these changes that we believe need to come about.
Okay, with that, we're going to take a commercial break. I just want to remind our audience, we're going to take phone calls later on, but right now we're trying to establish, some foundation for the discussion this morning as well. Folks, please stay tuned. For the record, we'll be back shortly. Good morning and welcome back to For the Record. In the studio with me this morning, Leader of the Opposition, Honorable D. Ezard Miller, MLA Mr. Christopher Saunders, and we're expecting the arrival of the Honorable Premier, Honorable Alden McLaughlin. Probably will be after the 8 o'clock news, more than likely. Mr. Miller, I'm sure that some people will marvel. Some people probably have already marveled. Number one, the fact that you were along with the Premier in the press conference, and the support that you've given to him, the fact that you will be around this table this morning, sitting around talking about it as well. Of course, when you're in the Legislative Assembly, you're there together all the time as well. But I want to remind my listening and viewing audience of a quote by the famous and popular Maya Angelou. And she had a saying, there was a quote that she made, "We are more alike than we are unalike." And more so, and this is my addition to it, more so when we're in a crisis mode, when there's a challenge that is facing us, that is when we unite.
But see, a friend of mine, my best friend actually told me a couple of weeks ago that, the only I can say about you that if you're wrong, you've been consistently wrong for 25 years. and my position is, and I have declared publicly, and this is supported by the members in the opposition currently, is that there are matters that we should never play partisan politics with. Those matters are such as education of our people, crime, things like this that threaten our very livelihood in terms of, because this is not only confined to the beneficial ownership and what damage that may do to our financial industry. But this is also flags up the fact that the UK having this unilateral authority where they can legislate for us without consulting with us raises fears that, as the Premier said at his press conference, that if the House of Commons is allowed to become emboldened because this act goes unchallenged and we don't try to put in place things that can mitigate against such actions in the future. There are other areas that there are people in this our society who have been advocating for years, many of whom will have connections in the UK, i.e. who can vote, who can sit in the Legislative Assembly, to our immigration legislation. And we in Cayman have resigned to the fact that while we may have lost some of our economic power, because you and I, OC, can remember when Caymanians owned everything here. Little it may have been, we owned it all. We had some comfort in the fact that we have retained the political power, and we choose who is elected and privileged to exercise that power. So we believe that this is an opportunity to challenge that, and we believe that we should show a united front. Now, there are people who support me who are going to say that you should take the political position on this, right, and prepare to defeat the government unity part in the next election simply by coming out and taking the opposite view and criticizing and firing up the community and giving the communities on the fight about. I don't believe that that's the best thing for the Cayman Islands at this time. And I get up every morning to shave. I have to look in the mirror, and I have to be able to say to myself, the person that I see in that mirror, that you've done what you believe is right for Cayman. I believe that this is the right thing to do for Cayman, and that we must show solidarity. Now, the Premier and I will have long discussions about the things that we need to change and how we should change them, right? But I am not going to play partisan politics by going out there in the public and says, well, we don't need to do this. This is a knee-jerk reaction. We don't have to have no fear of this, and people shouldn't allow it. No. That's not what this country believes, and that's not the kind of country I want to leave for my children.
I agree. Mr. Chris, you want to add to that, sir?
Yeah, well, the funny thing, if you look at unity itself, they say normally to have unity, you need to have a common purpose. And unfortunately, to have a common purpose, sometimes you have to have a common struggle. So it is normally when you're struggling against something is when people come together. And I think, as it's rightly said, one of the things that we agreed as a group is that there's some things that we're not going to play politics with. One of the things that people need to understand, and this is what I've turned a lot of people off in a political process sometimes, is the tribal nature of politics. And I think when people can see that their representative can put whatever differences aside for what is in the best interest of the country, I think it shows a certain amount of maturity. It's always very easy to look for the one-upmanship, but at the end of the day, we have decided that, if we see something that the government can be doing and should be doing better, I think we have an obligation to say to them, you know what, this is what it is that we think you should be doing, because the last thing you want is to get up and then say, they should have done this, and this, and then some people are going to say, so why didn't tell them that before? People need to recognize that regardless of the political difference, it's in everyone's best interest that this government succeed, that any government succeed. Because to wish failure on any government is to wish failure on a country. And at the end of the day, while we may sit in a part of the House, that's the Legislative Assembly that says opposition, no one went to the polls a year and 2 days ago and voted for an opposition member, government member. What they voted for was people to represent them and represent what's best about this country. Politics has always been about the future, and we need to make sure that at the end of the day, we look forward. As one person would always say to me, there's no future in the past. So we are where we are, and at the end of the day, it's important for us to also let the public know that even though this legislation as proposed has its own effects. People need to understand that the nature of our business, it is not as detrimental to the Cayman financial industry. I think the public needs to recognize that. So there's no need for panic. What is
the wider implications of this?
The wider implication is if we allow them to just push this through, then the question for us is, where will they stop?
Yeah, what will be next?
Yeah, so they need to understand that we may be little, but we punch hard, we punch heavy. You know what I mean? And unlike other places, we do have the resources to challenge them. And I think that message needs to be clear. The Caymanian people are not weak.
Now, there will be no doubt that the political pundits, probably including myself to a certain extent, and we've heard it already on, some of the other talk shows, even right here on Radio Cayman, as well as the way forward. How do we go about doing it? And no doubt, Cayman Islands government will take advice from constitutional experts as well, because our very own constitution, we need to understand, certain portions, of that as well. In particular, I've heard the talk about a referendum and having to go to the people to seek that, permission for changes to the Constitution. And I think I have about 2 minutes. I can very quickly read Section 69 of the Cayman Islands Constitution Order 2009. A law enacted by the legislature may make provisions to hold a referendum amongst persons registered as electors in accordance with Section 90 on a matter or matters of national importance, when so resolved by the majority of the elected members of the Assembly. But the question of whether the Cayman Islands should seek an amendment to this constitution that may result in their independence shall be deemed to be a matter of national importance. So Section 90 of the Constitution is quite clear that if it will result, any change to the Constitution will result in independence, then that is a issue of national importance and must be brought to a referendum.
Right, and there are going to be those political pundits who will claim that this is an advancement in the Constitution that dictates that. You can put that to rest immediately, because Bermuda has not had this clause for many, many years, right? And they've also had a referendum as to whether they should seek independence or not, and the people have said no, and the British government can't force them to take it.
Okay. Folks, we're going to our 8 o'clock news. When we return, we will have the Honorable Alden McLaughlin, Premier of the Cayman Islands, joining the Leader of the Opposition, the Honorable D. Ezard Miller, as well as Ms. MLA, Mr. Chris Saunders. So don't change that dial. Lots of things to talk about, and we know you want to listen to them as well. For the record, we'll be back shortly. Good morning and welcome back to For the Record. It is an historic day for the Record this morning. As I said to you earlier, it is now my pleasure to have in the studio and to introduce to you the Honorable Alden McLaughlin, and that's the British pronunciation, Alden McLaughlin, Premier of the Cayman Islands. He's here along with the Leader of the Opposition, the Honorable D. Ezard Miller, and MLA, Mr. Christopher Saunders. I'm going to again give you the quote from Maya Angelou. We are more alike than we are unalike. That is very apropos for us here in the Cayman Islands. We circle the wagons when we are threatened. We circle the wagons. We come together. So, Mr. Premier, good morning, sir. Welcome to For the Record. And what I'm going to ask you to do for the benefit of our viewing and listening audience is sort of like give us the genesis of this whole issue with public registers of beneficial ownership, the whole sanctions and anti-money laundering legislation, where we've come from, what we have done, where we're proposing to go. Good morning, Premier. Welcome to For the Record in such an unusual setting.
Good morning, OC. Good morning to the listening public. It's good to be here. I am very grateful to the Leader of the Opposition for allowing me to share some time on what is his day, the Opposition Day, on Radio Cayman. But as we have said from the very beginning, and as I should say, as soon as this issue became known to us, Mr. Miller picked up the phone, gave me a call, said I would like to come over and talk to you. And both him and Mr. Saunders came over and sat down and said, listen, this transcends the political divide. We know we have our respective roles, the government and the opposition, but this is an existential threat. And as you say, he didn't use those words, but we need to circle the wagons and make sure that we are speaking in a unified way about this issue as we seek to deal with it. And that's the way we've operated ever since, and that is the way that I am hopeful we can continue to deal with this threat. The Premier, my good friend Dr. Orlando Smith of the British Virgin Islands, and the Leader of the Opposition there have done the same thing. And I think it's a clear indication that the territories understand the seriousness of the threat, and that the last thing we need is internal division when we're dealing with issues such as this. OC, I'm afraid this is a very long story. I'm getting a little weary of telling it, but but I suppose the more that we talk about it, the more people will appreciate what the situation really is. But I'm actually going to start not on the public register point, which I will come back to, but on what I believe is an even bigger and more important point, which is the constitutional issue. This issue about the imposition of public registers on the territories is the result of the passage of an amendment in the House of Commons, and ultimately the passage of the EU Sanctions and Money Laundering Bill, which received the royal assent on Wednesday. What that did, for the first time to my knowledge, and to anyone that I've spoken to, even within the UK context, the UK Parliament has sought to legislate through domestic legislation, not the Ordnance Council that we are aware of, but through domestic legislation, by an amendment to their own domestic legislation, the EU Sanctions and Money Laundering Bill, for the territories, by imposing an obligation on the UK government now to issue an Ordnance Council to effectively amend the domestic companies legislation in the respective territories to provide for public registers. Okay. We believe, and all of the advice that we have, we've sought out and retained some of the best constitutional lawyers available in the United Kingdom. One who's very well known to us, and one of the principal architects of the current constitution that we have, Sir Geoffrey Jowell QC, and Lord David Panic, who is considered one of the best advocates, and certainly one of the best constitutional advocates in the United Kingdom. We've sought their advice on this issue, and them, and indeed many lawyers and jurists of great repute who opined during the debate in the House of Lords on Monday, have said that this is a clear constitutional overreach, that this is something that is essentially unprecedented, to intervene and seek to amend domestic legislation in the territories in areas which are quite clearly within the exclusive province of the elected governments. So the great concern that we have, although what we're dealing with now is the issue of public registers and the challenges that poses, because it makes us less competitive than other jurisdictions for businesses and people who have concerns about privacy. That's obviously a very important issue, but the bigger and more important issue is if we allow this, what's that saying? What you allow will continue. If we allow this to go unchallenged, there is the real risk that the UK Parliament, the House of Commons, will become emboldened by this and the success of this. And whenever they think that there is an issue, or they disagree with something in the territories, or they believe that their territories should have a certain type of legislation or a certain provision, they will feel that they can legislate for us. So, as an example, if they decide that there are aspects of our immigration law that they don't think is fair, because some English resident here has written to an MP and complained about something, they could possibly do a similar thing, either bring a proper bill or tack on an amendment to some bill that is going through and seek to change Cayman's immigration legislation. Similarly, with respect to the elections law and voting rights and the rights to stand for election. So those are just two very real examples and two areas we know that there has been for many years complaint by English residents about the fairness or lack thereof in their perception of the systems we have. So what we're talking about is, as I said, an existential threat, not just to the financial services industry, but having fought and battled for all of these years to build this country to where it is. And in my I can speak very personally about this. The first 9 years of my political career, a great part of that on both sides of the House were devoted to fighting to get a constitution which actually gave the legislature, the Cayman Islands Legislative Assembly, and the Cabinet of the Cayman Islands real authority and autonomy on domestic issues. Because what most people don't realize is that until the 6th of November, when the current constitution came into effect, 6th November 2009, the Legislative Assembly and the Cabinet of the Cayman Islands were merely advisory bodies to the governor. It was the governor who made laws. It was the governor who made policy in cabinet. The cabinet papers, you were cabinet secretary, you know very well,
Yes.
used to say, and cabinet advises His Excellency to do so and so.
And it even took quite a while for it to change that. I remember you insisting,
Well,
at that time.
I don't want to get
papers
into.
came
I
out.
can save that for my memoir. Should I ever live to see them? But the battles that I have,
Yes.
the quiet battles that I have fought over this issue. But what we now have is a constitution which has actually turned completely on its head the old system. What we have now is a section in the constitution. I'm not going to go read it because I think that people appreciate better when you just explain it, is that it confers on the Cabinet of the Cayman Islands responsibility for every aspect of government, including the in terms of policy, including the implementation of that policy, except the special responsibilities of the governor under Section 55 of the Constitution. And those are quite limited: external affairs, internal security, and responsibility for the public service. All other aspects of government are the exclusive province of the cabinet. We have a very curious situation which doesn't obtain in any of the other constitutions across the 14 territories. And it is because this constitution is a result of very, very hard negotiation.
Yes.
I and the government, I was leading the government delegation on these issues, but what I was saying was representing what the government position was. We didn't want the governor and cabinet at all. And we wanted the cabinet to be completely made up completely of the elected members.
Yes.
And if the Attorney General was there, he was there in an advisory capacity. What we wound up with in the end, I'm trying to collapse was a very long story, is an arrangement where the governor chairs cabinet but is not a member of cabinet. The Attorney General and the Deputy Governor sit in cabinet but have no vote. So that was the compromise that we reached. So it is quite clear that with respect to all aspects of domestic policy, it is the elected government, the elected members of the cabinet who make those decisions. Right. So to apply that to the current situation, what we now have is the UK Parliament, not the UK government, the UK Parliament saying, we know better than you, And we have decided that you are going to have, as part of your domestic legislation, i.e. the company's legislation regime, public registers as part of your system. That is a huge constitutional overreach, and we just can't let it stand. So we are approaching this in two ways.
Okay, what I'm going to do, I'm going to allow you to catch your breath now, and then we can come to the approach.
just warming
Let's take
up,
a
man.
commercial. I know, I see that. We're going to take a commercial break, and Ms. Susan, we're going to have to close off the calls for now because it is important that people understand exactly, what's going on. We're going to give the Premier an opportunity to catch his breath, take a commercial break, and we'll be right back. Good morning and welcome back to For the Record. In the studio with me this morning, I'm Mr. Christopher Saunders, Leader of the Opposition, Honorable D. Ezra Miller, and the Premier of the Cayman Islands, the Honorable Alden McLaughlin. And we had to interrupt his delivery before to go to commercial break, so we're going to pass the mic right back over to the Premier.
Thank you, O.C. And it's only you and them English people that call me Alden, My name is Alden. I was saying before we went to the break that we are tackling this particular concern in two ways.
Yes.
One is we have, on the basis of the advice we have taken the position that the attempt by the Parliament to legislate for the territory in this area, that is the area of the company's legislation, is unlawful. It constitutes constitutional overreach, and that if the government acts in accordance with what the legislation requires now, which is the making of an order in council to amend local legislation, that we will challenge that in the local courts. Mm-hmm. We do not accept that they have that authority to do so. And for the constitutional lawyers or those who have an interest in this, the position is we accept parliamentary supremacy for what that is. And we are not challenging Parliament's right to do things and to pass legislation. But the Cayman Islands and all of the other territories are administered pursuant to constitution orders. Those orders are UK legislation made by Her Majesty in Privy Council. The administration of the territories is conducted and can only be conducted pursuant to those orders. All the positions that we hold, from the governor right down, are positions held pursuant and in accordance with the terms of the Constitution order. We are all, as I have told many people, constitutional creatures.
Yes.
We have no authority outside what the Constitution gives us. Everybody is governed by the Constitution, including the UK Parliament. The UK Parliament, as I said, the UK government has, through the Constitution order, delegated responsibility for these areas of government and development of government policy and passage of legislation to the Legislative Assembly of the Cayman Islands, to the Cabinet of the Cayman Islands, to the Governor of the Cayman Islands. So they can't have it both ways. If the UK decided that the present constitution order is not what they want anymore, and they want to change it, that's another discussion. But as long as this exists, we all have to operate within its parameters. Mm-hmm. And the powers that we have, and the powers in this case that the UK Parliament have, are restricted by the terms of this constitution order.
Okay. Can we address the issue for Section 125 of our Constitution?
Right. So their argument will be that Section 125, which reserves unto Her Majesty the power to legislate for peace, order, and good government, gives them the power to do this. We say no. That power was never intended to be exercised in this way. That power is reserved for extreme circumstances where there is, for instance, a breakdown in law and order, massive corruption within the legislature. Within the legislature, the judiciary, or government generally. Those sorts of situations, not to be used to interfere with local domestic policy and domestic legislation. So that is the position that we are taking. We have formally advised Her Majesty's government of that. Yesterday, the Prime Minister, Theresa May, and Lord Ahmed, the FCO Minister, had a conference call with all of those Sea Territories leaders.
Okay.
And we all made it very clear to her. You will see if you look on, I think it's the Royal Gazette, Premier Burt has made it very, very clear, as I did to her, where we stand on this issue. And Bermuda, I think, is in an even stronger position than we are in that regard, because Bermuda's constitution is the only one that does not contain a similar section to Section 125. That is, there is no provision in their constitution saying that Her Majesty reserves unto herself the power to legislate for peace, order, and good government in the case of Bermuda. Because Bermuda in 1968 received a pre-independence constitution, but Bermuda has never gone independent. So that's 50 years later. So they have actually, in that sense, the most advanced of all of the overseas territories' constitutions. So that is the position we've taken with them. That's the position we're taking locally. So that we are adamant that the public register's provision will not apply to us until it becomes a global standard and becomes one of the UK's international obligations. We concede that where there are international obligations on the UK's part with respect to conventions and so forth, that the Cayman Islands has to fall in line, and that the UK would be entitled in those circumstances to legislate for us, but not in this particular instance. So that is that angle. The other angle, and a point which I made to the Prime Minister and to David Liddington, who is essentially her number two and the individual within Her Majesty's government that has responsibility for constitutional matters, is that it is clear that for the benefit of the territories and for the benefit of the UK government, these areas need to be clarified, and that constitutional safeguards need to be put in place to avoid this recurring. Because what we have as a result of the political dynamic in the UK at present is a situation where the government does not agree with this. The government is not pushing it. In fact, the government has been resisting it. I asked when I was in London up until earlier this week, I asked Lord Naseby, who, Michael Morris is his correct name, Lord Naseby, who has been a parliamentarian for 44 years, 24 in the Commons, rising to the position of Deputy Speaker, and 20 now in the Lords. If he had ever known of an instance where a minister, in this case Lord Ahmed, the RFC, is actually opposing his own bill. That is the result of the political dynamic that exists in the UK at present, where the government has a bare majority of 7 and faced a situation, and it's constantly facing a situation where members of the Conservative Party, and that is the Prime Minister's party, are rebelling and joining forces with the opposition to get through certain things. So you have a situation where the government says, and the government made an agreement with the territories who have financial services industries some 2 years ago, that we would develop an exchange of notes and technical protocol to facilitate the transmission, the efficient and swift transmission of information about beneficial ownership to law enforcement agencies in the UK.
And we have lived up to that.
Right. In as short a period in urgent cases as within an hour of the request. And that system, which is working very well, and all of the people involved accept that. We've had an assessment. Everybody says it's going well. Would be in lieu of, or as an alternative to, public registers. And in one fell swoop, the Parliament has just pulled the rug out from under all of that, left the government in this very embarrassing situation, which all they can do is apologize for because they simply do not have the numbers to make things different. So it is absolutely critical, more so than at any other time that I'm aware of, that we amend the Overseas Territories Constitution, certainly the one in the Cayman Islands, to clarify these issues and to make it plain that Parliament does not have this power. So what we are proposing, and I've discussed this with my friends in the opposition, is that the power we talked about just now reserved to Her Majesty in Section 125, the power to legislate for in cases of peace or for peace, order, and good government, that we be removed entirely, as is the case in Bermuda, or at a minimum be clarified to apply only to matters involving the most serious of circumstances, such as a fundamental breakdown in public order or endemic corruption in the government, legislature, or judiciary. And that it be made clear that the UK's power over international affairs be confined to the enforcement and implementation of clear international obligations of the UK alone, and that it be made clear that provided the Cayman Islands are not in breach of international standards, that the power of internal self-governance is absolute, and that the power of disallowance be removed, as is the case in Gibraltar, so that people understand what that means.
Yes.
The governor still has the ability under our current constitution to disallow laws that are passed down at the Legislative Assembly. And we believe, especially given all that's going on now, that like Gibraltar, that power should be removed. We really can't. I can't think why, given all that's transpired, we would want a situation where the governor can decide, I don't like that law, and therefore I'm going to disallow it.
Because there's no legal redress if in terms of that disallowance, I don't believe, right?
No, I don't know. I don't think that is susceptible to judicial review. It's been a while since I looked at it, but I'm pretty sure that is the case. That's the end of the road.
Okay. We're going to take a commercial break, and I know that we don't want you to lay out all of your strategies on the table.
Really is a, as quickly as I could do it, a summary of the current situation.
And that was excellent. When we return, what we want to talk about is, when is the trigger pulled now? When do we pull the trigger? And I would say also that based on what you've said, Premier, that and I think I made this statement as well, that the UK threw us under the bus. To a certain extent, it depends on who we're talking about, whether or not we're talking about the government or we're talking about the Parliament that threw us under the bus.
I'm not afraid to be critical of the UK government if that's necessary, but really, they just. I would say that there are certain departments that mismanage the whole legislative process, but overall, in the end, they just don't have the numbers. Because they had a rebellion of 19. I mean, it's just impossible.
Yes. Especially when you're already a minority government to a certain extent. Okay, folks, we're going to take a commercial break. What we are going to do, because we want to hear from you as well, after headline news at 9 o'clock, we're going to open the phone lines up. I'm not sure if we're going to have people queued up, but when we do open the phone lines up, we're going to ask you all to be as brief as possible, because we want to hear from as many of you as possible, but we want to restrict the conversation, if possible, to what we're discussing now. Folks, please stay tuned for the record. We'll be back shortly. Good morning and welcome back to For the Record. I'm your host, Dorrit Connor, and it is my pleasure to have in the studio with me this morning MLA Mr. Christopher Saunders, Leader of the Opposition, Honorable D. Ezard Miller, and our Premier of the Cayman Islands, Honorable Alden McLaughlin. We're talking about the issue of public registers of beneficial ownership. We're talking about the EU's sanction and anti-money laundering bill that was just assented to in the United Kingdom. We're talking about Cayman's response to that. We're talking about the existential threat for the Cayman Islands, not only in regards to this piece of legislation, but also the right of the UK to legislate for the Cayman Islands in certain issues and the type of autonomy we want to seek for that. No doubt that conversation, and in order for some of the things being proposed to be done, will require constitutional change as well. But before we go there, we want to talk about the trigger point, in terms of when things are done. We, like the Premier has said, the bill has been assented to at this point in time. There were timelines in relation to preparation for those registers, and if we don't have it in place by the end of 2020, then the UK, that amendment to the bill empowers the UK then to prepare orders in council to impose legislation on us. When do we start to make a really, really, really robust defense of this in the courts?
Well, the advice that we have is that the courts here would not have jurisdiction on the matter until an order in council was made, which sought to amend local legislation. Mm-hmm. And as I said, the view that we have is that we should not seek to challenge it in the UK courts. So in terms of a legal challenge, that would not be mounted here based on the current advice that we have until the order in council was made, which sought to amend the local legislation.
Mm-hmm. And the Foreign and Commonwealth Office, and we know, we have in our Constitution and the oaths that are taken in relation to our governor here, that, as long as whatever is being done isn't inconsistent with the UK's position, that, all is fine. How is the government, in this case, in the FCO, what are their feelings in relation to assisting the Cayman Islands to navigate this whole issue? Do they feel that the rest of the parliament, especially the opposition, will take advantage of this and saying you're being complicit in this because you're helping the overseas territories, while at the same time the overseas territories are a part of the UK's obligation to assist us, not to harm us?
Well, the UK have been consistent right up until yesterday when the Prime Minister spoke to us. Sir Alan Duncan was the first one to say it, because when he accepted that they didn't have the numbers in the House of Commons some 3 weeks ago or whatever it was, that they would do everything they could to assist the territories through this. But I don't take that to mean that they're going to assist us to challenge their the Parliament's ability to legislate for us.
Yes.
What they are talking about is helping us to prepare to, and in some way they believe, to mitigate whatever economic impact, negative economic impact that this may have on the territories, and to help us put in place the necessary legislation and systems to do public registers. That's not the kind of assistance I want. And we will politely decline that, because we do not accept that they have the ability to legislate in this way for us. So we're not going down that road. Mm-hmm. So that's where we are on that particular front. On the other front, which is, as I say, I think probably even more important with respect to the constitutional changes. I met with the Prime Minister last week, and with David Liddington twice during that week, and we also met with Lord Ahmed, the leader of the opposition, and Mr. Saunders was at one of those meetings, and we have explored with them the issue about the need for constitutional discussions to provide the necessary safeguards. There's been no pushback at all. And in fact, yesterday on the conference call, as I said, both the Prime Minister and Lord Ahmed were on it. We have a pre-GMC, Joint Ministerial Council meeting, in London on the 11th of next month. And they have said that we should put this on the agenda. So then that they are open to it. I wrote to the Prime Minister on the 23rd, again, formalizing that that's what we want to do in terms of a dialogue. And what I'm going to do, or try to do, when I go to London in another couple of weeks, is to try to get this thing put together so that we know who it is that we're dealing with and start to have the discussions. I've said to the leader of the opposition, when we get to the point where we're talking, get down to what we call brass tacks, right? Obviously, I would like him, and we'll have to decide whether there should be more than just me and him, or a delegation, whatever. Not too big, but to go and sit down with the authorities over there and start this process, because this is not something. I know how long these things can drag out. This is the last one dragged out for 9 years. We cannot afford that this time. We need to move swiftly, and if we can get the UK agreement to these key things, to get it done, because what we're talking about is protecting not just the Cayman's financial industry, which is very, very critical importance, but really our way of life and our own ability to determine Cayman's the course. We can't leave this to MPs in the UK Parliament, most of whom who couldn't even find Cayman on the map if you showed it to them, staying there and deciding what is best for Cayman. I'm not being disrespectful. I'm just being real.
Brutally honest.
Just being real about it, because I've talked to enough of them. I mean, there are some.
We can confirm that. We talk to some too.
There are some who care deeply about Cayman and who make a real effort to understand and to help. But there are many who could care less.
Yeah.
And but somehow believe that they have superior knowledge and understanding and values and all these wonderful words they use, and that they should be able to tell the territories how they should live and how they should operate.
I'm even hearing that there are some in the opposition, with the Labour Party who are of Caribbean extraction, Caribbean descent, and don't even know the history of the Cayman Islands, to the extent that at one point in time we were basically a parish of Jamaica and don't know the historical connections there. So even those on that side, would be helpful to let them know what's going on as well. But now let's talk about Section 90 that I read earlier, and also yesterday in doing my research, and I'm having a very difficult time on the Constitutional Commission's website to find 69, sorry. What I said, 90? Yeah, 69, sorry. Old age. Section 69, and when I was doing some research yesterday, I found on the Constitutional Commission's website a letter written by the then Minister for the Overseas Territories when the Labour government was in, Chris Bryant, in relation to the issue of referendum. And the part of that letter spoke about an agreement between the leader of the opposition and the premier in relation to constitutional changes. And once the two of you agreed and the UK agreed with it, that it could move forward. Because we're hearing a lot of rumbles here in the Cayman Islands about the whole issue of referendum. And what do we do? When do we involve the people of the Cayman Islands in this decision as well? And we also want to talk about that process. Ms. Susan, can we take a little early 9 o'clock break, or you have to do it at 9? Because if we do it early, I can stop now rather than getting someone engaged in a conversation and then having to interrupt them, 1 minute into the conversation. Can we do that? Okay, we're going to have an early break for headline news at 9 o'clock, and then we will return. Please stay tuned for the record. We'll be back shortly. Good morning and welcome back to For the Record. I have good news for you this morning. The director, Miss Norma McFeel, has given us permission to go on until 10 o'clock this morning. Unfortunately, the Premier has an appointment, another engagement, so he will be here with us until about 9:45, and we're grateful for him staying as well. Gentlemen, I couldn't resist reading this one. I have to read this one because this sort of fits right into our discussion. It says, good morning. Listeners wish to know if this appearance today heralds a new fusion of the current opposition government and the sitting government. Are all members of the opposition in support of this fusion, which appears unusual for how parliamentary procedures operates? I disagree with that part. People are questioning whether or not the two have merged. Mr. Miller.
No, I think it's important. Yes, this fusion on this matter.
Yes.
Alden and I both know that there are going to be matters on which he and I are going to vehemently disagree on politically, right? But there are times when it is important.
And I hope you all will come on the show around the table again like that.
and the people that you represent deserve this kind of commitment to what's best for the country. This is not about Ezra Miller, leader opposition, or Alden Premier. This is about the fundamental future of the Cayman Islands and the country that my children are going to grow up in.
Yep. Right. Okay.
I agree with all of that. And let me say that I do not want, nor would I encourage us to wind up as a one-party state. Our whole system of government requires checks and balances provided by an opposition. And those who vote need to have options when they vote. I mean, otherwise, it's really not a proper democracy. Yes. But, we can disagree, and we do disagree, without any rancor between us. I mean, Ezra and I get on best in the world, what people say. We have different views about a range of things, but one thing we have in common, and that is a love for this country and our people. Yes. And that overrides, transcends everything else. And as we both perceive this as an existential threat, and that don't mean that we can agree on every particular step of the way, and we can have to sit down and compromise certain things. That's just the nature of the game. But no, if Ezra and I were in the same party, then we'd be fighting for who was in charge. So that I had that already. I don't want to do that again.
but Chris, you want to add anything to that?
No. Listen, I think it's important for the public to also recognize, and for us as representatives, that not because you have a disagreement on one issue, that disagreement must carry on to a new issue. And I think, and we're going back to the point that that you said, if you look at it realistically, we have more in common than where we actually disagree. But for whatever reason, the media and others will always like to just focus on that 5 or 10% difference, and we forget the 90 to 95% that we have in common. And I think for us, and for me, this is my first term, and these guys are seasoned veteran. I'm really pleased. I haven't seen how tribalistic other parliaments have been able to sit down and see two leaders here within my country having this discussion. I can tell you, as a new legislator, young legislator, it's a good feeling for me.
And we saw similar things happening in Bermuda as well. I recall the Premier of Bermuda saying how former Minister of Finance Bob Richards had reached out to him and said, whatever support you need, we're prepared to give it as well. So, it's happening around. Let's talk now about the local roadmap in terms of the way forward and the involvement of our local legislature and the people of the Cayman Islands. Premier?
Yes, I think you were talking about the power to provide for a referendum, which is contained in Section 69 of the Constitution.
Yes.
So what Section 69 allows is essentially two things. That's over in Section 70. There are two sections that deal with the ability to hold referenda. One is Section 69, which is the power of the government. to actually initiate a referendum, pass a referendum law, as we've done in the past on two occasions now. Yes. And the other is the people-initiated referendum, which providing people can get enough signatures of registered voters. I think it's not less than 25%. They can actually trigger a referendum on a particular issue.
Right. And we don't have a referendum law as such. For every instance that a referendum is to be brought into place, you got
pass a law.
Pass a law for it.
You got
Yes,
pass a
that's
specific law.
Yes.
But there is, to come to this particular point, there is no requirement in the Constitution for changes to the Constitution to be made by referendum. In fact, that was actually proposed when the Constitution was being discussed, and the UK resisted it. They thought it was too inflexible. The letter you spoke about with Chris Bryant was what was called a side letter that went along with this Constitution, in which they said that changes to the Constitution, not amounting to major, turning the whole thing on its head, could be agreed between the leader of the Premier and the leader of the opposition, provided the UK agreed with it.
Yes.
Now, Mr. Miller and I are not proposing any such course on a matter like this.
Right.
We believe that whatever it is that we are able to secure in terms of what we believe are positive changes, that are safeguards for the Constitution, that they should be subject to debate in the Legislative Assembly, and that we should, as a legislature, agree on those before we move forward. So no one need worry about us trying to sneak through something on the sly. Whatever it is that we are able to agree will be very, very public and will be the subject of debate.
Yeah, proper motion in Parliament, probably moved by the Premier and seconded by me. So there's public debate and discourse on the changes that we are proposing.
Would we take it any further than that in terms of consultations, amongst the populace, at least to have meetings to let them know what is happening?
Well, I believe that this is the beginning of that exercise.
Yes,
yes. That's why we're here this morning.
We need to have a conversation about this.
Yes.
But it's also important for people to recognize that what we are dealing with now is not simply some domestic concerns. I mean, we have some domestic concerns about the Constitution having run now almost 10 years. Of where it needs to be tweaked or could be tweaked to improve the way it operates. But that's not what we're talking about. No, that's not the real threat. That would make things easier in some respects for the way government operates. What we're talking about now is addressing an existential threat.
Yes.
We cannot wait 9 years to do that. Right, so that it's important that people recognize that this is not something that we've sat down and said, we want to do this, we want to do the next thing. We are responding and reacting to a real threat that has just been.
And we subscribe to the Premier's belief that if the UK government, the government itself having suffered the embarrassment of what transpired in the House of Commons and followed in the House of Lords to make it in tonight, that there is an opportunity to address this. And we believe we need to use this opportunity, right, this window, and try and get greater protections for Caymanian people in terms of our domestic affairs.
And Premier,
and that is not going. That opportunity is not going to be here probably 6 months from now.
And let me address something else that is talked about. I tried to address it last night in certain company, and I've said so. There is talk around that one of the things that I want done is to amend the Constitution to remove the restriction on the Premier only being able to serve, the same person being able to serve as Premier for 2 consecutive terms. I know the genesis of that, and I know that it's well-meaning. And I've had many people say to me, Alan, you're doing a good job, you should be Premier for another term. Who else going to do it, etc., etc. OC, you know me well, better than most people. The graveyards are filled with indispensable men and women that the world felt we could never carry on without.
Yes.
Right? I don't consider myself indispensable. Someone else will emerge in due course who fits the bill. Nobody's perfect. Nobody has all the skills and abilities, and we all have to learn new things. But that is not a change that I want, nor do I want to serve another 3 years. when you have sat in this chair and dealt with these things, it's now 5 years. Yesterday was 5 years for me. And I still have a long tree ahead of me. And none of it looks easy. Believe you me. The last thing I want is another term as premier. So nobody need to worry about that.
Yeah,
And
that is not on
I
the
just want to add
table.
one thing too. I want to add one thing too. So to put their mind at ease, and we intend to unseat this government. So I don't want to believe.
No, things were going very well.
Good.
No. We agree on this issue.
We appreciate
And we
the change
also
of pace.
agree on the education leaving. So I don't want anyone for 1 minute
but-
believe.
but
you know
I
what I mean?
think that, you see, I appreciate. I want to make it clear that I appreciate the premier making that statement.
Yes.
Because if I make the statement, I have made the statement that is not would be something that I would ever subscribe to, and they would never get my signature on a document that acts for that, because that is one of the things that will be used to pollute this process, so to speak, for want of a better word. And I don't believe that we should try to avoid anything that is going to delay this process or complicate it or pollute it. It is complicated enough trying to get the UK government to agree to give us these additional protections. And we need all hands on deck, because we know that if there's one thing the UK people know how to do is to divide and conquer.
Oh yeah.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
And they would like nothing better than to have an opposition out there saying we don't want this and we want to remain with them having all the authority over us.
Okay. We're going to take a commercial break now. When we return, I'm going to ask the Premier to talk about the fact that while there is a unified approach by the overseas territories in certain respects, why it has to be an individual approach in other respects based on the fact that we all have different constitutions. Folks, please stay tuned for the record. We'll be back shortly. Good morning and welcome back to For the Record. In the studio with me this morning, MLA Mr. Christopher Saunders, Leader of the Opposition, Honorable D. Ezard Miller, Premier of the Cayman Islands, Honorable Alden McLaughlin. The show will continue until 10 o'clock this morning because we have such an important topic to talk about. Plus, it will give us an opportunity to practice for when the show is extended until 10 o'clock, which we're looking to do at some stage. The Premier, before I go to him, he mentioned an article in the Royal Gazette, and he mentioned the conference call that the overseas territories leaders had with the Prime Minister of the UK, Theresa May. That conversation appears to have lasted about 35 minutes, and the Premier of Bermuda, David Byrd, is quoted as saying, he says, "During the call, I restated the government of Bermuda's position. This country does not recognize the right of the United Kingdom Parliament to legislate on matters which are internal affairs reserved to Bermuda under its constitution. I reiterated our position that Bermuda will implement a public register of beneficial owners when it is a global standard. Similar position that the Cayman Islands have taken, and our Premier has eloquently stated that not only here but in the UK as well. So we see this conference call, Premier. We see that the overseas territories that are affected by this are all getting together, but at some point in time, they're going to have to diverge in terms of their talks with the UK and their approach, simply because different constitutions.
Also, I'll address that, but I've just received a press release from the Prime Minister's office about the phone call, and since you've done that, I'll just read that. There'll be a little surprise at the end, but I didn't know I was able to mention that. But if the Prime Minister has issued a press release, then obviously
It's public domain.
It's public domain. Prime Minister Theresa May and Lord Ahmad spoke to leaders of the overseas territories. A Downing Street spokesperson said yesterday the Prime Minister and Lord Ahmad, Minister for the Overseas Territories, held a conference call with leaders of the overseas territories with financial centres to discuss company ownership, transparency, and in particular the issue of public registers of beneficial ownership. The Prime Minister spoke about the recent passage of the Sanctions and Anti-Money Laundering Act. She said that she understood that the cross-party amendment to this legislation that would require the overseas territories to create public registers was a matter of great concern for the leaders, and that she was conscious of the strong reactions the issue had provoked in their territories. The Prime Minister added that the government highly values the relationship with the overseas territories and would continue to work in a collaborative and pragmatic way on these issues and others. The Prime Minister spoke of the government's efforts to promote public registers of company beneficial ownership as the global standard, and reiterated that we would expect other major financial centres, including the Crown dependencies, to adopt public registers at that point. She also welcomed the importance of the existing cooperation of the overseas territories with UK law enforcement agencies and emphasised the need for this to continue and develop. She invited the leaders on the call to share their positions and opinions on the issue, and made clear that the UK's aim is to secure the best possible outcome in a way that minimises any possible risks to the economies of the overseas territories. The leaders looked forward to Lord Ahmad's visit to the Cayman Islands, Montserrat and Anguilla next week, and to the June Joint Ministerial Council in London. So, as I said, the bit at the end is Lord Ahmad is visiting. It's a flying visit from what I understand. He's only here for a day. But he'll be here, I believe it's Wednesday of next week.
Okay.
And I think, so I certainly have pressed them that there should be an opportunity for engagement with the media. There'll be opportunity for engagement with myself and my cabinet and with the leader of the opposition and whatever delegation he proposes. He hasn't even been informed of this yet. But I say I didn't know that I was able to say so, but if they've issued a press release, well, I
you could only get it here on For the Record. No other radio station.
I guess I could. I'm okay to talk about it. So I think the principal purpose of the mission, initially at least, was not to really talk about this, but to talk about hurricane preparedness and so forth, because he has responsibility for this. But I certainly have made it very clear to him and to those around him that you can't come to Cayman and not talk about this issue. This is a hurricane for us already.
Yes. So this is our wind rush.
But to the point that you asked me about OC, yes, each of the territories have a different constitution, reflecting, they claim, the various levels of development and ability to look after yourselves administratively and legislatively in the territories. And so, as I indicated, Bermuda has the most advanced. In some ways, Cayman is, in most ways, Cayman is next. Two of the things that Gibraltar has that I think we would like would be a situation where the Premier chaired cabinet, not the governor. I'm not suggesting we're going to propose that this time around. I'm just saying in terms of what I think are good provisions, and that the governor cannot disallow legislation passed by Gibraltar Parliament. And the other territories have slightly less autonomy than ours. So while I think these broad principles that we've talked about in terms of providing constitutional safeguards is something that all of the territories could adopt, quite how they come out in the actual legislation is another matter. And I think the UK will welcome a broad discussion about constitutional changes, but as you said, in the end, we all have bespoke constitutions, and we're going to have to sit down territory by territory with the UK and talk about specifically what we would like.
Okay. We have one caller. Let's go to the phone lines. Caller, good morning. Welcome to For the Record.
Good morning, Mr. O.C. How are you today?
I'm fine. Good morning. And yourself?
Good morning to the Honourable Premier, the Honourable Leader of Opposition, and Mr. Chris Saunders, MLA. Mario Eubanks here. I just have a quick point to make. And I want to congratulate the Premier and his team, public sector and private sector, and the opposition for for uniting on this very important national battle. The EU, in its efforts as well, seems to be taking a slightly different approach, but the beneficial ownership campaign and the EU objectives obviously can be aligned around one thing, and the EU seems to be saying that they want to see more local content or local substance in our financial services industry, whatever that means. But obviously, if you were to look at local content or substance to mean the involvement of Caymanians in the industry, we could certainly could look at that as something that is a national objective as well, and could be achieved within a medium term. Yesterday at the Chamber's Economic Forum, President Paul Biles led the panel on a question about training and development for Caymanians in the financial industry, and Mr. Jude Scott from Cayman Finance was there, and Mr. Dax Bastio, and they all discussed it. And I think it's an important point. I'd like to encourage the Premier and the team that in terms of local involvement and putting together strategies, that obviously working to build the capacity of Caymanians within the financial industry, getting into the industry, progressing in the industry, and having a real stake in the industry creates a lot of loyalty and a lot of demonstration of substance and content. And I know some may say, well, we're addressing that by the reforms with immigration. I don't think that's going to address it. I think what is being proposed is going to put us where we are right now, which is in a bad position in terms of human capital development. But that's another topic for another day. But I just wanted to encourage you all to continue the fight, but also look at the issue of substance and content and the empowerment of the Caymanian human capital within the financial industry and all industries really. But in terms of this one, this is the one that we're fighting to survive in. As one of the strategies that we need to all also pull together on and work on. So I'll leave you with that.
Sir Mario, before you go, are you referring to substantial business presence?
That as well, but also in terms of Caymanians being involved, Caymanian employees being engaged and having upward mobility opportunities and getting positions and being able to excel in the financial services industry. So the presence is one thing, and that's important, but the presence that we have now, I'm saying that we need to also enhance the ability and mobility and visibility and sustainability of Caymanians within the financial services industry as one of the things that can help to satisfy the EU demand that they want to see more substance and more content in the local financial services industry. That's what I'm getting at.
Okay.
I don't know if you have any other questions or not. I mean, I can see a lot more, but I'll leave you if you.
Thank you very much, caller, for that. Anyone else wants to respond to that, Premier? Yeah.
No, I take those points entirely. The substantial business presence is another issue. I've always said that there's. Sorry, I struggle with those things. Hear my own voice coming back to me. I've always said that it's every cloud has a silver lining, and while we are still struggling and battling to address this issue of substantial economic presence in terms of what the EU are insisting on to avoid us, to hopefully get us off the grey list and avoid us going on the blacklist. There are some real opportunities, I think, to ensure that this requirement of substantial economic presence, to ensure that there's actually more economic activity in Cayman, thereby providing more employment and economic opportunities for Caymanians. The challenge we continue to have is ensuring that Caymanians actually get the chance to benefit from these, which is, I think, Mario's point.
And are equipped also.
Suitably
equipped.
Yeah.
Okay, let's take a commercial break, folks. Please stay tuned. For the record, we'll be back shortly with the Honorable Alden McLaughlin, Premier of the Cayman Islands, Honorable Diaz Ed Miller, Leader of the Opposition, and MLA Mr. Christopher Saunders. Good morning and welcome back to For the Record. The show will continue until 10 o'clock this morning. Premier has to leave us at 9:45. We're not going to have any more commercial breaks from here on in until 10, so the Premier can slip out of the studio at his convenience as well.
Provided though, see that you don't allow Mr. Saunders to have any further discussions about on-seat in the government.
No, listen.
I'm getting afraid to go now.
No, listen. We're not going to beat you up on this one. No. It's a good Friday. We're not going to do that. But, I mean, we got plans, for some of your team members, Up to just this week alone, we had a couple meetings come to the candidates, potential candidates. So, go already. It's
not time for inexperienced people.
Yeah.
So we have good, solid veterans
Yes.
to navigate the waters
Okay.
when I'm gone.
Now we have heard we have heard the term used, the nuclear option, and that basically refers to, in this particular setting, to the use of orders in council by the UK government in relation to its overseas territories and to legislate for them. My question is, what is the nuclear option for the Cayman Islands? We have seen David Burt here where he has said wanton disregard for Bermuda's constitution, and he says he argued that the UK's action shows wanton disregard for Bermuda's constitution and has vowed that Bermuda will not make its register public until the House of Assembly votes to do so. So he has set the parameters. He has set the red line in terms of where it's going.
I've
Yes.
said
Yeah,
very
the Premier
similar,
says he
very
has-
similar things.
Okay. Yes, I know. Yes.
So
He's very clear in a press conference that he's not accepting that the order is legal. So
Yeah.
that's the same thing.
Okay. So if our attempts to challenge this legally fail, and the UK then has its way and imposes the order in council, do we simply accept it then, or do we shift gears then? That's another area, a bridge that we'll cross when we get to it.
well, actually, that's not the way it'll work.
Okay.
The UK will issue the order in council first.
Uh-huh.
The effect or the purported effect of which would be to amend the company's legislation in Cayman to provide for
Right.
public registers. It is that legislation that we would challenge,
Okay.
right? So, and I expect that a matter like that would probably get, assuming we get there, appealed all the way to the Privy Council. If at the end of the exercise, the Privy Council
Sides.
decides that the UK Parliament did have that power, then we stop. I mean, we have to be bound by the result
But
of
the
legislative
constitution that they've won.
process. And Cayman will, as always, have some decisions to make.
Yep. And
But quite frankly, I am optimistic that we won't get there.
yeah.
The landscape is constantly evolving with respect to financial services and what global standards and what are not global standards. And I have a great deal of optimism that day won't actually come. But as I said, and I keep repeating, but the bigger issue for us is that we have to ensure, as far as that is possible, that these kinds of things don't become a common occurrence. Every time the UK Parliament decide that they want something different in the territories, or they want to prevent something in the territories, they feel they can legislate for us. They've got to understand and appreciate that they have given us, granted we negotiated it, they've given us a constitution with a Bill of Rights that imposes, among other things, imposes upon the government their responsibility to ensure due respect for privacy. That is a constitutional obligation that we have. And this act of Parliament just flies in the face of the very constitution that they have given us. So we simply can't just accept that.
I think it's important for the public to understand that what has transpired here is entirely different from what was the norm. For instance, I was in what is now the cabinet when they sent down the order in council on capital punishment. But there had been dialogue for a number of years. We had said we weren't doing it, we weren't doing it. So and that came the executive route through the FCO and the government in power. It was not a renegade act of the parliament, so to speak. The big difference here, and what the point the Premier made earlier, is the existential fact of this, is that if the House of Commons, or the House of Lords for that matter, is emboldened to believing that they can write domestic legislation ad infinitum, then what's the purpose of our legislature?
Exactly.
So we have to protect our democracy and our domestic rights.
There's one other distinguishing feature, and that is that with respect to the death penalty, the UK was under an international obligation.
Yes.
As a result of the ECHR, the European Convention on Human Rights, that the imposition of the death penalty was considered a breach of human rights.
Yeah.
So they had an international obligation. They were seeking to ensure
And
that
what the Premier's proposed that we agree with is that we expect that obligation and the right to enforce that will remain.
Will remain there.
intact.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes. We have one caller. Let's go to the phone lines. Caller, good morning. Welcome to For the Record.
Good morning to you, Mr. Lucy.
Good morning, sir.
Good morning to the Honorable Premier, Alden McLaughlin. Good morning to the Honorable Leader of the Opposition, Mr. Edward Miller. Good morning to Emily, Chris Saunders.
Good morning, Mr. Hurlston.
As a citizen here and elector, we know that the majority of us, our input or ends after the elections because we have placed 19 people in there to represent us. We know that you cannot ever, in no way, shape, or form, satisfy the 20,000 or 22,000 electors. It's impossible because each person might have some different desires, some different opinions, and something. So I just wondered if, hello, am I still there?
Yes, sir.
Yes, you are.
Yes. Is when you say global standards and international standards, because there are a lot of wealthy countries, the fiefdoms and all this, who have different standards, and we're not going to change there. But you have communist countries, and China and Russia and other countries, and Venezuela and so forth, who don't obey the same standards and probably never will, that we abide by. But I wondered, His Excellency, the governor here, representing Her Majesty's United Kingdom government and herself, I just wondered if he has a part to play in all this. In other words, will he be going around with you to these meetings that you intend to have with the people to educate them on what the financial service is all about, what this is all about, why is this issue so important, so forth, and give his point of view, or is that is impossible? I just wondered that. I'll hang up and listen out for your answers.
Thank you very much, caller, for that.
Well, I don't know about that.
But it has always been kind of taboo for the government to get involved in this level of local politics, because this,
And the mere fact that do we really, not saying it in an insulting way, but do we really need him, to do that? If he wants to explain the UK government side of things, that's another matter, and there are ways of means of him doing that. But
that would be.
But this is a curious situation because we really are not in a fight with the UK government.
Precisely.
Yes. The fight with the Commons.
and at least not yet. Well, with this issue, they are very much on side, and obviously they are not going to concede that they don't have the UK Parliament doesn't have the ability to legislate for us. They're not going to say that. But certainly they're very sympathetic to the circumstances in which we find ourselves. But sympathy alone doesn't ease the pain that we have, and we have, as I've told the Prime Minister in the most diplomatic way I could muster, that we have to look out for what are the best interests of the Cayman Islands, and unfortunately that means that we have to publicly challenge the UK government at some point on this issue. That's just the reality.
Yep. And Chris, you want to add anything to that?
No, I totally agree. The thing about it is, and one thing I've said is that where the financial industry in this in Cayman has failed somewhat, they have not went around and really proved to the public exactly the value that the financial industry plays. I've seen some comments on social media that's a little bit alarming by some people that I thought would have known better, but as a good book said, my people are destroyed for lack of knowledge, and I think it's incumbent on us in these positions to go around and have and this is the start of a forum where you go and you start educating the people. Because if people sit back and believe that you can take $300-400 million of government revenues and just diversify the economy overnight to replace that, it's not going to happen. So we have, and I think where we have fell down too, is you look at organizations like Oxfam and some of the campaigns that they've been running against the Cayman Islands and the things that they've been trying to blame on us, which is again for lack of policies in their own country where their own lawmakers have failed them. They have overrun the UK infrastructure, especially on the outside, with a lot of immigrants from out of the EU. We saw from even the debate in the House of Lords that they have a shortage of nurses. So there are challenges within their own healthcare system, but for whatever reason, Oxfam has a video floating around basically saying that all of these companies that are doing international business are to blame for all of their problems.
Lord Nisbet had some nice words for them too.
Yeah, this is the kind of deflection. So we need to recognize also that we need to be in a position to tell the Cayman story better, and it actually starts right here at home. We have to go out and start really educating our people in terms of what it is that we do and the full benefits.
Yeah, Premier, it's about 2 minutes before you're going to have to leave, so I want to give you an opportunity, for some closing comments.
Well, thank you, O.C. I want to thank you for this opportunity and the leader of the opposition in particular for agreeing that we should have a joint discussion this morning on this important issue. And I think we've had a chance to ventilate it quite well. We didn't have very many calls, but I've been around this long enough to understand that that's often the case because people are listening.
And we sort of like close them off.
And processing the matter as well. But I think it's important that we continue the national discussion about this, particularly as we press ahead now with trying to obtain the necessary constitutional safeguards to ensure that the Cayman Islands continues to prosper over the years. As I said to the leader of the opposition, constitutionally, I have a maximum of 3 years. That's the most I can possibly continue as Premier. Whether I run again is still an open question as just a representative.
I didn't find anybody for your seat yesterday.
but so I say that because often, unfairly, you hear people saying, "Oh, they just want power." They just when they're talking about constitutional changes. What I want, what I have always wanted, and what I've always battled for, is what we can do in the best interests of the Cayman Islands to ensure that this magical success story that we have, because as much as people cuss and carry on, you look anywhere in the region, if not anywhere else in the world, and tell me of a better place, a better run jurisdiction than the Cayman Islands. You're hard pressed to find it. And I tell people, Kurt Tibbetts has been my model for most of my life since he adopted me as his baby brother when I was about 19 years old. And in many respects, I've tried to model how I operate. Anybody see how happy Kurt looks when he walks around? You know the reason for that?
He honked a horn Sunday morning when we were
You know the reason for that is because he has done his bit and some more for this country. And he has left with the knowledge and belief that the country is in good hands and he is able to do his little business and prosper. His children have good jobs and can prosper, and now his grandchildren. That's how I want to be. Content that I've made my contribution, and my country is in good hands and in good state, and with the best possible constitutional arrangement we can.
And spend some time on that farm.
And that we continue to have a good
As Premier, we're going to make sure that he's even happier than Kurt.
and that we continue to have a good opposition and a good opposition leader like Mr. Ezra Miller, and a good member of the opposition like Mr. Chris Saunders.
Yep. Thank you very much, Premier. And if you want to meet,
Thank you and the listening public.
same time, same place next week Friday if you want.
Not invited.
I said same time, same place. Well, you know, you have a standing.
I'll leave you all to sort of do it.
Thanks for coming.
No.
Have a good day if that's possible.
Yeah. Speaking of that, and that gives me an opportunity to segue right into this whole issue with the Barbados election, as well as the past election in Grenada. People criticize us about our constitution, and there are some shortcomings to it, and we won't get into the reasons why we didn't get some of the things that we should have gotten. But we have a situation in Barbados now where the Barbados Labour Party has taken all of the seats. Grenada, the same thing. I think they have 15 seats, no opposition whatsoever. And there is nothing in their constitution that addresses it. And both of them have, bicameral legislatures where the Senate is appointed, and part of that appointment, some of those members are appointed by the leader of the opposition. No leader of the opposition.
I don't believe, and certainly when I become premier, I don't want to not have an opposition. Mm-hmm. That does not mean that opposition has to be vitriolic, or it has to be hateful, or it has to be disrespectful. Mm-hmm. For me, that is the greatest change I am trying to bring about in our Legislative Assembly. Is, as you know, when I was simply an independent member, I didn't oppose the government just for opposition's sake. I disagreed with many things that they brought in, but I always looked for a constructive alternative of a way to make things better. When we sat down and spent hours, Mr. McLean and I, to file 37 amendments to the National Conservation Law, of which the government accepted 32, that's an indication, because there's no reason for the government to accept them unless they made the law better. Equally, with the education law, we filed 27 amendments, I think it was, and the government accepted 25. What I want in the opposition that I lead is a constructive opposition to the government. Where we disagree, we must disagree with respect. We must disagree with decorum. We must be firm, and we must have an alternative that we believe, and the people that we represent, is a better alternative than what the government has put forward.
Yes. I want to give both of you an opportunity to talk about what's happening in your constituencies, if you so want, as well.
Both of us are now, June is right around the corner, and of course that means closing exercises for the primary schools.
Yeah.
And the opposition is very much committed to raising the profile and the standard of those. They don't call them graduation exercises anymore. They call them school leaving or something. But we're very much engaged in our individual constituencies and making sure that those are going to be something that the kids will remember. So
well, for me, the crime issue is definitely, I'm trying to get some cameras up across my constituent. The burglaries are still an issue. We don't have much areas in my constituent that are flooding, but with hurricane coming up, one of the exercises that we're actually doing now is start looking at some trees that probably need trimming around some people's homes. I think this is something that we should address now, as opposed to wait till something is coming. So I say to anyone in the Bontown West area, I mean, I've done my drive-through and I've did my initial assessment, but if anyone believes that there is a tree that poses a risk to them or their dwelling, just please give me a call, 926-2804, and I'll organize to get it addressed outside of the ones that we already identified. But I think that's definitely one of the things. The insurance issue is still a big thing for us on the PSC. We saw the health insurance. We looked at the last CME report that was tabled in Delhi. Over a 5-year period, the health insurance profits range from $4 million to $14 million. Then it jumped up to $51.5 million just in 1 year. And you also look at the HSA numbers during the same period of time, especially in that last year it jumped up. You saw where even the HSA accounts receivable jumped up. So we definitely have an issue with health insurance in the country that we need to tackle. Then we also look at property insurance too. For the 3-year period, the average profit was around 28 million, then it jumped up to 50 million over the last 2 years in terms of property. And when you consider that we have paid over $1.3 billion in property insurance since Hurricane Ivan, with pretty much no major claims of anything. And now to see property insurance is going up the way it is going up, and then you look at areas in Florida that got hit during the same period of time, their own regulators only allowed them a maximum of 9.9% increase, whereas people around here, one person reached out to me, their insurance went from under $2,000 to over $8,000. So these are the kind of issues that we need to tackle going forward. So they are the national issues, but these are the pocketbook issues. But we still need to work on ways in terms of protecting our people against some of these really greedy business people they have out there.
Because you take the property insurance issue, we have probably the best building standards in the Caribbean, but we get no benefit from our insurance by having almost hurricane-proof buildings.
Exactly. Yeah.
You know?
Yes.
So we need those are the kind of things that we're trying to impress from the PSC, to have the regulator through SEMA impress on the people that yes, you may have claims that occurred in other areas, but because we have done all these things locally to lessen your risk and to mitigate your risk, it should be reflected in your premiums.
Yeah, but something will be wrong where the places that got hit is paying a far lesser increase in their premiums than the places that didn't get hit.
Exactly.
So something has got to be fundamentally wrong. So we definitely need to look to see what level of teeth we need to put in those laws to deal with those issues.
Okay, we have one caller that's been hanging on for a while. We're going to make this our final call for the morning. Like the Premier said, we didn't get a whole lot of calls, but that was basically deliberate as well, and we know people are listening also. Caller, good morning. Welcome to For the Record.
Good morning, Rosie and members.
Good morning, sir.
Morning.
There's only one question that's been in my mind for a long time. I heard many years ago that if some company or people own more than like 60% of Cayman in value and land, that they could actually control the island or something like that. Could you give me some insight into that?
No, I don't know where that old wives' tale come from, but we have laws that control the island, and the obedience to our laws is in no way related to what you own or what your net worth is. We're all the same. We're all under the same laws.
Well, I'm kind of glad the caller mentioned that, because ironically, just yesterday,
we spoke about it too on the phone.
Yeah, we spoke about it yesterday, because we're looking at just yesterday we're looking at the UK antitrust legislation, because to deal with some of the businesses in Cayman that are growing quite large. And just yesterday we were speaking about this very same issue. So it is something that we are cognizant of in terms of being mindful of who's buying up what, who's owning what, and what it is that we're leaving for our children. Because at the end of the day, I've always held the belief that we will not be remembered for what we inherited, but rather for what we left behind. So we need to make sure that at least we leave behind an island that is at least more prosperous and have more opportunities for our people.
Okay. Thank you very much, caller, for that. I'm going to, again, Chris, leave the microphone with you. Closing comments, and then we'll let the Leader of the Opposition, Honorable Ezra Miller, have the final say.
Well, first of all, I want to thank yourself and the Premier also for coming in this morning and for having us. Politically, I've had many discussions in terms of the approach that we're taking on this issue. And even Mario had called me yesterday, and, Mario Rankin, that is to say, Chris, I have to support the position that you guys are even taking in terms of working with the government. So when you can see everyone willing to lay down their arms to some extent and said, you know what, this is something that we need to do in the best interest of the country, I think it speaks volumes. From that standpoint, and we have gotten a lot of positive feedback from members within the community. Yesterday, I had some meeting with some people within the industry, the financial industry, in terms of, and for them, they're already putting on their thinking caps to see, what we can also do. Because at the same time, too, and let's be clear on one thing. One of the fears I've always had for the financial industry is what would have happened to us after 9/11 if there was one terrorist that was ever found to get any money from a secret bank account in the Cayman Islands. So this is something that we always have to be cognizant of, in the sense of we are always one major terrorist action or one action away from some bad reputation. I mean, we have survived the Paradise Papers. We have survived the which is the other, the Panama Papers. And we have a well-regulated industry, I mean, which is even above the global standard. But nonetheless, this is not something that we should take for granted. One of the companies I met with yesterday, well, the representative for the company, he said to me, you know, Chris, we are also now going through a process of looking at all our companies just to make sure that we don't have anybody on a list if this ever becomes public that we don't want to be doing business in Cayman Islands. So some companies are, in essence, doing this proactively to make sure that whatever reputational damage may come out, you know, from something, at least, you know, we're covered. So I think it's important, and at the same time, too, for people to realize that this does not affect a large part of our business, not to say that we're willing to give up, you know, any percentage of our business, you know, because at the same time, it's still people employment. That's how we look at it. You know, so from that standpoint, you know, I just leave some time for the premier. I just want to say thanks for having us and everything else.
That's why I brought you.
Mr. Leader.
Well, I think that it's important for the people to understand that we in the opposition and the premier, I must congratulate him and thank him for being willing to allow us to participate, because after all, they are the government, right? And they're the ones that have to deal with these issues, right? And we are here to support them when they're doing what we believe is right for Cayman. And we think that the action that they are proposing to take is necessary and it is the right course for us to follow. And we are going to give them our support. And we've agreed that as he said earlier, that whatever we negotiate from the British government will be subject to a debate in the Legislative Assembly, so that the public has a fair opportunity. And we would expect that each member of the Legislative Assembly has an obligation to inform his constituencies. And that is the route that needs to be, and what we should be doing now is the members of the opposition, I can assure you, will so do, is dealing with our constituents and our contacts within the industry to give them the assurance that this, we believe, is a necessary act, and we should support it and answer any questions that they have and explain that they have. And we look forward to several of these opportunities here with you on For the Record, and both me and the Premier in order to answer questions of the public, because the only way the public is going to know is that we're prepared to have dialogue with them. Exactly. And you know that's my modus operandi ad infinitum. From the 80s, that's how I operated. So, and I'm happy that the opposition members are subscribing to that, and I can give the country the assurance that they are dealing with their individual constituents on these matters, and they are practicing participative democracy as well.
And one of the best platforms to have that dialogue is right here on Radio Cayman. Folks, I want to thank you, our listening and viewing audience, for allowing Radio Cayman, and by extension For the Record, into your homes, into your vehicles as you traverse the busy roads of the Cayman Islands, into your places of work, whether it be an office cubicle or if you're working in the outdoors. I want to remind you that we are our brothers and our sisters' keepers. There is always someone out there who's less fortunate than we are, and I ask you to extend a helping hand to them. If you can't do that, then I suggest you donate to a worthy charity, because we always want to consider those who need, not necessarily those who want or even those who crave. I say to you, have a great day, have a great weekend. Continue to support your radio station, Radio Cayman, and as usual, we ask the good Lord to bless these three beautiful, wonderful Cayman Islands.
Informative, impartial, insightful.
This is your talk show.
1-800-534-8255. Your calls, your input. This is For the Record.